that opportunity there to connect to that person, well, I think that's very important, is how every organization grows. And it's how families grow and connect, and it's how businesses grow. So the opportunity to make people part of the story is a very important thing.
Hello, and welcome to More Than Sunday, a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive into the stories, themes, and questions of our faith. My name is Eric Chakowski. I'm one of the worship directors here at First United Methodist Church, Richardson. And with me every week is one of our associate pastors, Josh Fitzpatrick. Josh, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Eric. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be with you. We are so excited about a new worship series that we're moving into starting this Sunday. It's called The Wonders of Worship, and we're really focusing on maybe questions and wonderings that people have around why we gather for worship, sort of the whys around why we participate in some of the traditional liturgical practices, why we sing, why we clap our hands or do some of the things that we participate in a worship gathering.
Well, and I love the play on words, of course, with the title itself, because worship in and of itself is an expression of our hearts as we really look at who God is and how do we respond to just how wonderful, and not just wonderful as in like happy-go-lucky wonderful, but the awe-inspiring fear of God that we have as God's creation. What is our expression? What is our response to that? Is we worship, because there's nothing else we can do. So on the one hand, it's the wonders of worship. But yes, again, like you're saying, the intentionality, asking the why, the wonders, what are the questions we have of why do we do things the way that we do?
And one of the reminders in a lot of contexts is the importance of asking why, right? It's been sort of a popular question to ask, again, in a lot of areas of life. And we really wanted to dive into asking the whys of worship and really focusing on the intentions behind those things that we do. We are so excited today to have a conversation with someone who puts a lot of time and intention and asks a lot of whys around the work that he does as well. He's from the corporate world and works for a local business, family-owned business here in the Dallas area. And we are so excited to welcome Joe Stallard to the podcast. We are here with Joe Stallard today. Joe is the Chief Human Resource Officer at Sewell, and we're so excited to welcome you to the podcast today. Thanks for being with us.
Well, it's great to be here. For those of you who don't know, Sewell is a family-owned business. We've been in business for 108 years, and we specialize in the automotive industry, but what we're best known for is great customer service.
So those of us who are familiar with Sewell, who live in the Metroplex and the DFW area, are familiar with Sewell and its reputation for service. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey with the company, how you got into Sewell and how you got to the place you are now?
Sure. I grew up in West Texas. I grew up in the car business. My father was a car dealer. So, growing up, I loved every part of it. And I worked in it all the time. And I asked my dad, what do you study in college to be a car dealer? And he said, get a degree in accounting. And while I was at Texas A&M, I met a guy who told me about this great internship in Dallas at Sewell. And it sounded great. One, it was in Dallas. I grew up in Odessa, and Dallas sounded very exciting. And my girlfriend, who is now my wife, was going to have an internship in Dallas. So I came to Dallas, worked for Sewell as an intern, and it was great. Upon graduation, my highest paying job offer was at Sewell. So you would think that's what I would do. But I actually drove to Dallas, met with Mr. Sewell, and I turned it down because I was told as an accounting major that the best experience was to work in public accounting. And he said, now, why would you want to do that? And I said, well, I think you have a fascinating business, and I did. The internship was great. And I said, but I want to see a lot of businesses, and public accounting would let me do that. And I remember he said, well, how long do you think this will take to see all these other businesses? And I said, I don't know, about 2 years. And he said, well, why don't we stay in touch? And I came to work 2 years to the day later at Sewell.
Wow.
So true stories. And that'll be 25 years next month.
Wow, that's cool.
So I started from a public accounting. I went into sales. My accounting friends did not understand that at all. And then I became a sales manager, did that for several years, later led one of our service organizations, and then moved into the role I am in now. And so that's been about a 25-year run so far.
Wow. So, Joe, you are a member at First United Methodist Church, Richardson.
Yes.
And we know a few others who also work at Sewell. What about Sewell makes it such a special place to be?
Well, I think, first of all, we're not a public corporation. We're a privately held corporation, and we are a family business in so many ways being a family business. We have right around just under 3,000 associates. I think, it's not perfect. I want to be very clear about that. But what makes it a good place, I think, is there's a lot of like-minded people. We like serving other people. We're competitive, but not overly competitive in a way that means that you have to lose. It's just you just want to be the best version of yourself. And I think that whole idea of providing world-class service is about always getting better, trying to exceed the customer's expectations, trying to really grow with that family and serve them at a high level. And we just have a lot of people who are really pumped up about that idea and really love doing it that way. And so, one of the things that we do on an ongoing basis, you can't have a meeting of more than about 4 people where you don't start with a customer service story. That allows us to, one, include other people as they join our company, but also reinforces what are we doing? You want to run a business in a way that can sustain itself, but also it's the relationships that make a big difference.
Now, storytelling, I think, is something that's a part of your DNA. I know that you've talked to us about this elsewhere. How did that become a part of your DNA, and why is the act of storytelling so important?
I'm not sure how it became part of me a lot, but I have somehow recognized that it was a very important thing, and I've always been fascinated by that. I've always liked people who are good at telling good stories. Mm-hmm. But at Sewell, I think what we've noticed about storytelling is we tell a lot of stories, and every organization does to some extent, but we have a very practiced approach at it in that we understand that the power of stories helps people learn what to do when rules don't apply. You can have a policy and procedures manual, but it's never going to cover everything. It's all the unspoken things that say what's right and what's wrong. How do you fit and how do you not fit? One of the stories I would like to share, and it's a very simple story, but it's so powerful in this way. A friend of mine called me, and they have a car, and they bought it at our Fort Worth store, and they live in College Station. So every time his wife would come to Fort Worth to see her dad, or a lot of the time she would get her car serviced. And so he called me on a Monday morning, and she'd been there over the weekend, and he called, and he said, you guys always do a great job. And he said, we really appreciate that. But this last weekend, you guys just knocked it out of the park. And I said, oh, well, that's great. And he said, my wife's just going on and on about this weekend. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, she got her car serviced, but you guys gave her flowers. And he said, I don't know why that's such a big deal, but she's just crazy about these flowers that are on our kitchen table. She says, I don't give her flowers anymore. Thanks for that. But he said she just really appreciated that. Why'd you do that? And I said, well, that's really great. And so when we hung up, I called the general manager, and I said, hey, one of my friends, his wife was there, Mr. Wald. They're from College Station. I said, she was telling me about this weekend we gave her flowers. And he said, why do we give her flowers? I said, I don't know. And he said, did we wreck her car? And I said, no, I don't think we wrecked her car. And so the general manager and I called the service manager on the phone and said, why did I give her flowers? I said, well, that's why we're calling you. And he said, did we wreck her car? So apparently at Sewell, if we wreck your car, you're getting flowers. But we just kind of worked our way down the line, and we get to the cashier, and she said, oh, on Saturday? And I said, yeah. And she goes, oh, I give all the ladies flowers on Saturday. And we said, huh, how do you do that? And she said, well, we have that huge bouquet of fresh cut flowers on the showroom. And she said, we get a brand new bouquet every Monday morning. So Saturday in the afternoon, there's a lot of beautiful flowers. So I'll start strategically taking some out, and I wrap them in tissue paper, and I give them to the ladies, so we're just not throwing them away. And, I always kind of kid, we fired her for stealing flowers. And we didn't, of course. But what's so great about that story, and we told that story over and over, is what that says to everybody in the organization. First of all, we're celebrating a person for doing a very kind act that really nobody knew about except the customers. But it's also an invitation for everybody else to go, I can see myself doing something. What can I do? Whether it's a bottle of water or whether it's, and this is true, so remembering that the dog treat should be gluten-free for this person's dog, you know. And so little things like that, those stories, very simple stories, invite people to do things in a very similar way.
Well, and what those stories are speaking to is the philosophy that Sewell has of service. For those who don't live in the Metroplex, the TV commercials very often that Sewell produces are all about client testimonials. They're all about storytelling. And the tag that I always hear is, I'll always drive a Sewell, right? And what's interesting to me about that is it's not a car manufacturer, right? Yeah. It's a particular grouping of dealerships. Clearly something is causing people to come back to Sewell. So what's the reason for the emphasis on service at Sewell?
I think that started a long time ago with really Carl's father. Carl is our owner, and then we have Carl III and Jacqueline, who are kind of the next generation, and then our owner, Carl. His father was named Carl. Everybody's named Carl. But I really think there was something said just in the family, and I think that's why we were so proud to say that we're a family organization, because it's really our family, and we think of that very much, our company as a family serving someone else's family. And when you think about family-to-family relationships, that goes beyond just the one transaction of did we make money on this or did we not, but it goes on this long-term view. you have a friend or a family, you're going to advise them a different way. It's not what's the most convenient. There have been times that there have been products that we've had that we're like, I'm not sure you'd want that one. And we really try to watch out for the best interest of the customer. And some people just look at it in the short term, And Mr. Sewell and the whole Sewell family have always looked at it in a very long-term way. And that goes back to just that very simple word, relationships. If you're in a relationship and you want that to work, it's give and take all the time. And I think when people say, I drive a Sewell, what they say is, I have a relationship at Sewell.
Now, I'm drawing back to the power of storytelling to relay your emphasis on service from one employee to the next. Do you train your employees to tell stories? Or how does that become a part of each employee's skill set?
Well, I think they get trained by a little bit of osmosis because we do it so often. I mean, every day at every store, there are stories being told. And what I love about it is somebody will we'll have a meeting and they'll say, before we get started, does anybody have a customer service story? And it always starts with, yesterday or last night or the day before or over the weekend. And people almost kind of compete with each other a little bit. And there's subtle corrections. I think there's an art to storytelling. If you're the hero of every story, nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think over time we've gotten better at telling stories. And they don't have to be long and drawn out. They just have to be crisp and clear. The more authentic a story is, the more it resonates with people. And also, just like that story about the cashier, when people can see themselves in that story, the more it connects.
So, again, as we mentioned, you've been a member of this church for some years. Where are some areas that you feel like the church is telling stories well, and where do you feel like there are areas that we could be doing a better job?
Well, I think, and this is my point of view about a church, I think Sunday morning you've got to be good, and it's your biggest impression point. When I came here today, I was pleasantly surprised about how many people, just groups that were going on. Was the gardening club, or looked like a lady had some sewing things going on, and that's good. But where I really think that the church has to be good is on Sunday morning. The Bible is this wonderful book of stories, and then how we relate those stories to each other. I think that's important. The other part about, and a different way to think about stories is, when you come into an organization, you want to belong. And think of it this way. So if you're married and, the first time you met your spouse's family, you showed up and they're kind of checking you out going, who is this guy or who's this young lady, whatever the situation is, and you're checking them out. And let's be honest, the first time you met them, they did some weird stuff, and all that means is they did stuff that were different than you would have done it. So, so you're looking at them and they're like, they open their Christmas gifts on Christmas Eve. Who does that? We're a Christmas morning person,
Right. Oh, yeah, we did that.
And so I think that when that happens, just like the church, you're trying to check in each other out. But here's what happens. At some point, and this is where the church has done a really good job, we start telling stories on ourselves. And so when you think about your spouse, you met them, you're at their family, and at some point they let you in by telling stories. They said, okay, here's the deal. Aunt Judy, don't ever tell her anything. She can't keep a secret. Uncle Ed, don't ever loan money to Uncle Ed. You'll never see it again. When they started telling you stories about the family, they're letting you in. But you are not part of the family until you become part of the stories. So think of it this way. Let's say you join a family and they're all about chips and hot sauce. I mean, everywhere they go, they're like, we really love good chips and hot sauce. And you say, so do I. Well, all of a sudden, we're linked in stuff we like, and you say, but I also like queso. In fact, I make a mean queso. Well, then the family says, this is the best queso we've ever had. And now they're a family about chips, hot sauce, and queso. You're part of the family because that's a story about the family that you're part of. If you never can make that connection, you will never be part of the family. Same way at the church. So how you connect in with a group is very, very important. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of people visit, and you see them 1 or 2 or 3 Sundays and never see them again. The missed opportunity there is, how do we connect? I think the church does a really good job of saying very clearly who we are. I love the mission statement, welcome, grow, and serve people in Christ. It's easy, and I think it's a good point. Now, in the welcoming, I think about the welcoming ministry, and sometimes they'll bring somebody to our class. I'm in the Agape class, and similar age children and things like that, because they're hoping that we connect. And you'll see people visit, and sometimes they connect and our class grows, and maybe sometimes they visit and that wasn't quite, and maybe they go to a different class. But that opportunity there to connect to that person and the welcoming ministry, well, I think that's very important, is how every organization grows, and it's how families grow and connect, and it's how businesses grow. So the opportunity to make people part of the story is a very important thing. And oftentimes you think about people who connect with the church through Vacation Bible Camp. How many people are there talking about? 600 or 700?
Yeah, we have 720 registered for this year.
I mean, that's amazing.
It's incredible.
That is amazing. I remember when Karen was doing it with our kids, and it was 300 or 400. I think Karen was in charge one year, and it's like, wow, that's a lot of people. But isn't it wonderful that it's grown? And they may become connected to the church or become a part of the story when their kid had a phenomenal vacation Bible camp, and then maybe that connects the family.
Well, and I love this idea of becoming a part of the story and then changing the story. So your example of the chips and hot sauce family then becoming a chips and hot sauce and queso family. I remember reading a book once about coming up with church mission statements. And on the one hand, it was advocating for coming up with a mission statement. But on the other hand, it said, every time somebody joins your church, your mission statement changes because they contribute something to the story. So as more and more people and a diversity of people and people bring different gifts and skill sets to the church in general, your story and your mission is going to shift based on who you are as a church. I just love that image.
So I'm an introverted church member, and I really want to do a better job of welcoming someone or making them a part of my story. But sometimes that's hard for a lot of us, right? So what are some techniques maybe that either you guys employ at Sewell or that you've just noticed over the years for drawing people into the story?
Well, I think that's a great question because everybody's different and everybody connects in a different way. And that's why I think things like, at Sewell, the onboarding process is very important to us. And so we want to connect people as much on that day one. So whether you start in Dallas-Fort Worth or Houston or San Antonio, you will be in Dallas on your first day. And it's really a storytelling session because we want people to connect. But it's also an invitation for them to connect with other people. And so we never serve a box lunch because box lunches are portable. And so if I'm highly introverted, I might want to take my box lunch and go eat somewhere by myself.
And I do.
But so we try to have more of a community meal. It will always be a hot meal, but it's served kind of like a family style. But then, knowing that somebody may be more introverted than less, we will eat at smaller tabletops, 4-top tabletops, as a way to connect people in a different way. But at that time, they've heard who that person is, how they came to work here, where they grew up. Oftentimes that's a connector. Oh, you're from California? Oh, I spent a lot of time in my life growing up in California. So they're connecting. And we really try to watch how they connect. It doesn't always work, but I think that's a good technique of doing that. And you got to understand that people are different. And we do a lot of shared education. We do very little education online. We do a lot of it together, but a lot of that's to create connection.
And is there any training or techniques that you guys use for when a customer comes through the door to draw them in and have them be a part of your story?
There is. So one, we really want to make the customer feel comfortable. And I could spend half a day, you don't want to hear a half-a-day podcast on how do you greet somebody, but we could spend and do that. But there is a science behind it. Ideally, what we're trying to do is mirror the customer. How do they feel? So we're really cognizant of how we mirror how the customer wants to be greeted or talked with. But the other thing that we want to do is it's not a mechanical way, but it is very intentional. We're going to invite you to hear all of the things about Sewell it's almost in an invisible way, but you walk away going, oh yeah, I did find that out. How did I find that out? But there is a science behind that. But all of that's designed is to connect.
I think that's so applicable to any organization that's welcoming people through their doors, and just a great reminder for us as a church that strives to be welcoming, as you mentioned on Sunday morning, right? To really work towards meeting them where they are, being able to talk a little bit about the church without it seeming too forthcoming or imposing, and hopefully just bring them into our story.
So I keep coming back to this idea of story because I see it in every element of what you're saying. You're telling stories to the customer even before they show up through your marketing, and whether that's in print or on TV. You're telling stories to your employees from day one as you're onboarding. You're telling stories from the corporate culture from the top down to share about the culture and the DNA of who you are as a company. What elements do you think make up a good story? And you've heard a lot over the years. So as a story expert, what makes a good story?
Well, I don't know if I would be a story expert, but if someone who really likes and pays attention to how stories are told, I think first and foremost, the best stories are authentic. They're not fake. They're very authentic. And second, I think I said this a while ago, that it can't be where you're the hero of every story. That never feels good to somebody else. And third, I think the best stories that connect are the ones where people can envision themselves being successful in that story. It's not such a heroic act that nobody else could do. All of a sudden, in their mind's eye, they're kind of saying, I could do something like that. I can relate to that. It doesn't just seem so far out there. And a little humor goes a long way, I think, and great stories. And you can think about, Clayton's always going to have his 3 points.
Yeah.
But, you think about how Clayton shares, especially about, his love for sports and football. He has a little bit of self-deprecation in there. But I can say that's all wrapped in, or at least in my perspective, it's all wrapped in this certain level of being authentic. And you've seen stories before where it almost feels like between the storyteller and the audience, there's a glass shield because it doesn't quite connect. But when somebody who literally doesn't have that, I always try to figure out what made it connect with this person. Why did it feel like they were talking to me? And I think it starts back with it just being authentic. And when you're authentic, when you really believe what you say, it shows.
I think often as public speakers, preachers, worship leaders, a number of different vocations, we feel like often we have to sort of put this air on of, oh, now I'm speaking in front of people, and it causes sometimes us to be a bit disingenuous. But I think you're absolutely right. I think when people can find in themselves ways to be the same person up in front of 1,000 people that they are when you meet them at the supermarket or at the baseball game, that's one of the things we say often. I've said often about Clayton, and one of the things that I think makes him such a great pastor and a great preacher is I agree with you that I think he's the same person up in front of a congregation that he would be when you just have a one-on-one conversation with him, and there's a real authenticity there that connects with people. So, Joe, we've got one more question that we ask everyone on the podcast, and that question is this. At this point in your life, what's one thing that you wish someone would have told you?
I think, one thing, and I've had the good fortune of being put in quite a few positions of leadership, and, you learn things. I wish I would have done it this way, or I wish I wouldn't have. The one thing that I wish I would have learned earlier, and it goes back to what we've been talking about, but I really believe this to be true, is I think early on as a young manager or leader, whatever you want to call that, you're all about the results and getting things done. But what you really learn over time is if I can really take the time first to really connect individually with the people that I'm working with, and you can say for or what, I always like to think of it as we're working with each other more so than you're working for me. I think that really makes any organization better, the more connected the people are. And I think intuitively I've always kind of known that to some extent, but once you get the title, sometimes you forget about that. And it's not about you, it's about how you as a group can make that group better. I think that's a lifelong journey of learning, but I wish I would have known that earlier. Nobody teaches that in school. Here's the balance sheet, here's the income statement, here's how you get to where you need to get to, but you're not going to get anywhere without the people.
I love that. It's profound. It's something that I hope I can take to heart sooner than later.
Holds true for the church, too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
No matter what walk of life or what vocation we have an opportunity, and even beyond that, a calling to be in relationship with others. God created us for relationship. God created us for community, and the church, when operating at its best, can be a beautiful manifestation of that. But the most important thing for us to remember in that is to be willing to invite people into our stories.
There's a great story in Scripture in the book of Ruth that really illustrates this idea well of somebody becoming a part of somebody else's story. That comes to us in the form of Naomi having two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And when all three of their husbands die, we pick up the story in Ruth 1 where Naomi is urging her daughters-in-law to go back to their former lives, their former homes, and to their former gods. And in verse 15 it says this, "So she said, 'See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law.' But Ruth said, 'Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God.'"
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of More Than Sunday. If you like the podcast, please feel free to share it, go online and leave a comment, or give us a rating so that others might hear about us. We've got a new episode coming out every Wednesday, so make sure you also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to not miss our next episode. If you want to find out more about First United Methodist Church Richardson, you can find us online at fumcr.com, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Special thanks to Joe Stallard for joining us this week, and make sure you tune in next Wednesday. Have a great week.